Well, hello there. I just thought I'd take this opportunity to look back at some of my previous work. Now, this was a piece that I made back in 2005-6 and installed in 2007. It was on a housing estate in Kemsley in Kent, in fact, it's still there, and approached it in such a way that obviously I needed to do some research. The only specifications I had was the size of the plinth and the overall height of the sculpture, but exactly what it entailed was quite up to me. I produced some drawings and submitted them to the housing group, which were then accepted, and I cracked on with it. But the way I actually started this thing was to go and do my research in Sittingbourne. I came across a lovely man called Peter Morgan. He was a historian, he was a history teacher, he was a schoolmaster, headmaster, I believe, and mayor of the town, and had the keys to every public building, and was my main resource for information on this sculpture and this timeline. Now, the reason why I wanted to start a timeline, that through talking to Peter, a Bronze Age axe head had been found quite locally when I was doing another development down the road. These things are very rare, and I thought, what a fantastic place to start the timeline. The Bronze Age significantly changed the landscape. Prior to that, wooded, boggy area, well, you know, with a flint it takes ages to chop a tree down, but with a Bronze Age axe it's a much easier thing, and it pretty much deforested the area quite quickly when the Bronze Age kicked off. So I thought that's my start time, and while I was constructing this, they were building the bridge across to the Isle of Sheppey, a brand new bridge. And I thought that'd be a wonderful place to finish because that's what was going on locally. So the outer skin material, I bought most of it, except the interior structure of this thing. And I hand beat this, believe it or not. And imagine stainless steel bending it over a bench and things, but this is what I came up with. And for the outer skin. Now, at this point, it didn't really show up on the drawings, but it certainly shows up when you start making something. It looked a little bit too phallic, and I didn't want it to draw the wrong sort of attention. I didn't want the council to get ear bashed either, so I changed the design when I got it to this stage, and I realised by lifting one side that I could distort the shape enough for it not to look so phallic. So that's where I got to, and the interior work within it, where the history and the timeline was all going to be happening, I made from mild steel. Now, Sittingbourne and Kemsley area really took off in the 1830s, 1840s. A lot of industry, paper mill, brick making, and light industry and stuff. Load of fish, shellfish industry, and just no end of stuff. A lot of it is still there as well. For Kemsley Fields was also had the second oldest bowling alley in the country. It's got an old courthouse which is still there, and anything else that I could find that was really significant to the area, I tried to mention it in mild steel by sculpting it around. With the paper and the back half of it, because of the paper industry, I found some rollers. It was actually from a mushroom composting machine, but I felt it was close enough to signify the rollers of the paper industry. So quite an involved sculpture. It had the size of commission on it that made it worthwhile, so I could put some time in it. I obviously had some very practical things to do about how it's going to be bolted down. It's got to cope with gale force swings and things. Oh, and by the way, you'll get a picture of Peter Morgan at some point leaning on it. When I got it to a certain stage, I invited him across and let him have a look at what I was up to, see if there was any mistakes really as well. You know, had I got off a wrong line somewhere? Does this make sense? And he felt it did, so I cracked on. I had to make a really good industrial base. I knew I was going to bolt it down, and that's what I came up with in the end. I got a local student from the art college in Ashford to come down and take some better photographs than I was getting with a fantastic camera, and he did an absolutely lovely job, I thought. And this was the condition it was in when I took it to Kemsley back in 2007. Now, I go back and visit this sculpture every now and again just to keep an eye on it, and it's never really been attacked or messed about with too much. It's still there. They haven't ripped it out of the ground and melted it down, so, you know. I tried to get a feel of how the local people felt about it, but there wasn't too many people about, and of course, you know, even more difficult now. but I will do. I'd like to do a lecture in front of it for primary school children or even secondary school children about what's mentioned in this sculpture and its significance to the area. But that never really happened. Doesn't mean it can't. So there you are. There's a challenge. If there's a school teacher in Sittingbourne that would like to have a school teacher, do a lecture in front of this, and I'm really quite fine to do that. Now, when I turned up to actually install this thing, I actually incorporated the help of a local college, which my friend was involved in. And I'm very glad I did, because my drill packed up, and without their drill, I'd have never got this bolted down that day. So thank you very much for that. Oh yeah, I thought I'd also mention the fact that this little train that I built into the bottom of this sculpture, I went back to Kemsley a couple of years after I installed this, just to check up on it and make sure it was okay. And as I was coming away, there was an elderly couple that approached this sculpture, and the lady was feeling the train with her hands. She clearly had sight problems, so she was looking at this thing very, very closely and feeling it with the tip of their fingers. And I could hear her talking to her husband saying, "Oh, is this the little train?" And yeah, I sort of poked back into the fray, if you like, and said, "Oh, by the way, I was the sculptor that made this and all the rest of it." And the lady said, "My father was the last person to commercially drive this train." Now, this little train was the train that brought the paper pulp up from the docks. And it had a very unusual chimney for a UK train, a bulbous type affair. Now, I'd only ever seen that on American trains, and I wondered what that was all about. Well, after a little bit of research, a bowl like that will stop the sparks coming out the top. Now, the reason why it was on American trains because they were going through virgin forests and they didn't want to set the place on fire. And in the case of Kemsley, they had this little train. Well, it was driving paper pulp up, and they used to pile the logs and piles of timber to obviously be in the process of making paper. So they clearly didn't want any sparks rattling around the place. Now, this little train still exists. It's a museum piece. They run it up every now and again for tourists and things in the summer months, I understand. And it was just amazing to find that connection with the history, and the fact that I was only there for 5 minutes just checking the sculpture over, and to bump into that couple, it absolutely made my day. And I had a lovely chat with him. So yeah, that sort of bringing full circle history, it sort of made the whole sculpture for me worthwhile. So yeah, that was a nice little finishing touch a couple of years after it had been installed. So there you are. That's Kemsley for you. If you want any more details, or there's any school teachers out there that would like me to do a lecture on this, I'm quite happy to do so. And yes, thank you very much for listening. Okay then, bye now. Mm-hmm.